The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Training Compound in Coronado, California. Sarah Mitchell stepped off the bus, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, and surveyed the intimidating facility that would either make or break her over the next 6 months. At 24, she stood 5 feet 6 inches tall with a lean, muscular build that spoke of years spent in rigorous physical training. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail, and her green eyes held a determination that had carried her through 2 years of preparation for this moment. The other recruits filing off the buses were predominantly male, their conversations filled with nervous energy and bravado. Sarah remained silent, observing everything around her. She had learned long ago that the best way to assess a new environment was to watch and listen before making her presence known. The compound buzzed with activity as drill instructors moved between groups of new arrivals, their voices sharp and commanding as they began the process of organizing the latest class of SEAL candidates. "Listen up, tadpoles." The voice belonged to Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran whose weathered face and steely gaze had intimidated countless recruits over the years. "You think you're hot stuff because you made it through the screening process. Let me tell you something right now, 90% of you will ring that bell before graduation. The question isn't whether you'll quit, it's when." Sarah watched as some of the recruits shifted uncomfortably at these words. She had heard similar warnings during her preparation, but she also knew that statistics meant nothing when it came to individual determination. Her path to this moment had been anything but conventional, and she had overcome obstacles that would have stopped most people long before they ever set foot on this base. Growing up in rural Montana, Sarah had been raised by her grandfather after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8 years old. Thomas Mitchell was a retired Marine Corps gunnery sergeant who had served 3 tours in Vietnam. Rather than treating his granddaughter as a delicate flower who needed protection from the world, he had taught her the same lessons he would have taught a grandson. By the time she was 12, Sarah could field strip an M16, navigate by compass and map, and had completed her first 20-mile ruck march. Her grandfather had also introduced her to the world of working dogs. The Mitchell family had been training hunting and tracking dogs for 3 generations, and Thomas continued this tradition with Sarah. She learned to read canine behavior, understand pack dynamics, and develop the patience required to build trust with animals that had been bred for specific purposes. The German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, and various hunting breeds that lived on the family property became her closest companions and teachers. When Sarah turned 18, she enlisted in the Navy with dreams of becoming a SEAL. However, at that time, the program was still closed to women. Undeterred, she requested assignment as a Master-at-Arms, the Navy's equivalent of military police. During her 4 years in this role, she excelled in every aspect of her duties. She completed advanced tactical training, earned expert ratings with multiple weapons systems, and volunteered for every challenging assignment available. More importantly, she spent her off-duty time training. Every morning before her regular duties began, Sarah would complete a workout regimen that she had designed based on known SEAL training standards. She ran long distances, swam in open water whenever possible, and practiced underwater breath-holding techniques. She studied military tactics, learned about explosive ordnance disposal, and even completed a civilian paramedic course to understand battlefield medicine. During her final year as a Master-at-Arms, the Navy announced that it would begin allowing women to attempt SEAL training on an experimental basis. Sarah immediately submitted her application, along with documented proof of her physical fitness scores, weapons qualifications, and leadership evaluations. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Wells, had been initially skeptical but became one of Sarah's strongest advocates after witnessing her dedication and competence. "Mitchell represents the best of what our service has to offer," Wells had written in her recommendation letter. "She has consistently exceeded every standard placed before her and has demonstrated the mental toughness and tactical acumen that would serve her well in special operations. More importantly, she has earned the respect of her peers through her actions rather than demanding it through her words." The selection process had been grueling. Sarah underwent extensive physical and psychological evaluations, background investigations, and interviews with senior SEAL officers. She was one of only 3 women selected from hundreds of applicants for the pilot program. The other 2 candidates were Lieutenant Jennifer Park, a Naval Academy graduate and former surface warfare officer, and Petty Officer Second Class Maria Santos, a former Navy diver with extensive underwater demolition experience. Now, standing in the California sunshine listening to Senior Chief Rodriguez outline the challenges ahead, Sarah felt the weight of expectation on her shoulders. She knew that every move she made would be scrutinized not just as an individual candidate, but as a representative of all women who might follow in her footsteps. The pressure was enormous, but she had learned to channel pressure into focused determination. Your first week will be administrative processing and initial physical assessments, Rodriguez continued. Don't think this means you get to take it easy. We'll be evaluating everything you do, from how you make your rack to how you interact with your fellow candidates. SEAL teams require individuals who can function as part of a unit while maintaining their own high standards. The group was divided into smaller sections for initial processing. Sarah found herself assigned to a barracks room with 3 male candidates: James Morrison, a former college football player from Texas; David Chun, a Navy rescue swimmer from California; and Marcus Thompson, an Army Ranger who had transferred to the Navy specifically to attempt SEAL training. Morrison looked at Sarah with barely concealed skepticism when she entered the room. At 6 feet 4 inches and 230 pounds, he towered over her and clearly doubted her ability to keep up with the physical demands of the program. "No offense," he said, "but I don't see how this is going to work. When we're doing buddy carries and surf torture, you're going to be a liability." Thompson, who had more experience with integrated training from his Army background, was more diplomatic. "Let's see what everyone can do before we make any judgments," he suggested. "I've served with some tough women downrange. Performance is what matters, not assumptions." Chun remained quiet during this exchange, focusing on organizing his gear. Sarah appreciated his approach and decided to follow his example. She methodically unpacked her belongings, set up her area according to regulations, and prepared for whatever challenges the instructors might present during their first full day of training. That evening, after completing their initial paperwork and receiving their training schedules, the candidates were allowed a brief period of free time before lights out. Sarah used this opportunity to walk around the compound, familiarizing herself with the layout and observing the ongoing training activities. She watched advanced students practicing small boat operations in the bay, their movements precise and coordinated despite the challenging conditions. Near the obstacle course, she encountered Senior Chief Rodriguez speaking quietly with another instructor. They were discussing the 3 women in the program, their voices low but not entirely inaudible. "The brass is watching this experiment closely," Rodriguez was saying. "Any of them wash out, and it'll be used as evidence that women can't handle the program. Any of them make it through, and suddenly, we'll have pressure to lower standards to accommodate more female candidates." "What's your read on them so far?" asked the other instructor, a lean man with lieutenant bars on his uniform. Rodriguez considered the question carefully. "Park has the leadership background and technical knowledge, but I'm not sure about her physical capacity. Santos is strong as an ox and knows her way around underwater operations, but she seems to have a chip on her shoulder about proving herself. Mitchell is the interesting one." "How so?" "She's quiet, observant, and her file shows she's been preparing for this longer than anyone else in the class. But she's also the smallest of the 3, and some of the male candidates are already questioning whether she belongs here. It's going to be interesting to see how she handles the pressure when things get really difficult." Sarah moved away before the instructors noticed her presence. She had learned what she needed to know. The staff was watching all 3 women carefully, but they seemed to view her as a potential wildcard rather than an obvious failure. This knowledge would help her navigate the political aspects of the training while focusing on the performance standards that truly mattered. Back in the barracks, her roommates were engaged in the typical pre-training conversations that occurred whenever elite candidates gathered. Stories of previous achievements, speculation about upcoming challenges, and attempts to establish pecking orders within the group. Sarah listened, but contributed little, preferring to let others reveal their personalities and motivations while keeping her own cards close to her chest. Morrison was regaling the group with tales of his college football career and subsequent tryouts with professional teams. His narrative consistently emphasized his physical superiority and questioned whether his current teammates would be able to match his performance when the real challenges began. Thompson countered with more measured accounts of his Ranger training, focusing on lessons learned rather than personal glory. Chun spoke briefly about rescue operations he had participated in, demonstrating a technical knowledge that impressed even Morrison. "What about you, Mitchell?" Morrison asked eventually. "What makes you think you can keep up with this group?" Sarah looked up from the training manual she had been reading. "I guess we'll find out tomorrow," she replied simply, then returned her attention to the text. Her response clearly frustrated Morrison, who seemed to expect either boastful claims or defensive justifications. Thompson nodded approvingly at her restraint, while Chun continued organizing his gear without comment. Sarah had given the only answer that mattered. Performance would speak louder than words, and speculation was pointless until they faced actual challenges. The first real test came sooner than expected. At 0430 hours, the lights snapped on, and the voice of an instructor filled the barracks. "Drop, and give me 50. Move it, move it, move it." The candidates stumbled from their bunks, disoriented by the sudden awakening, and began executing push-ups on the cold concrete floor. Sarah had been a light sleeper since childhood, a trait developed during camping trips with her grandfather when staying alert could mean the difference between safety and danger. She was among the first to react, dropping into proper push-up position and beginning her count. Morrison, despite his size advantage, struggled with the sudden transition from sleep to exercise. Thompson and Chun adapted quickly, their military experience serving them well in the situation. "Faster," the instructor demanded. "My grandmother could do push-ups faster than this, and she's been dead for 10 years. The verbal pressure was designed to create stress while the candidates performed physical tasks, simulating the multitasking requirements they would face in actual combat situations. After completing the push-ups, the candidates were given 2 minutes to dress in physical training uniforms and report to the grinder for their first group run. Sarah had learned to lay out her clothes before sleeping, allowing her to dress quickly even in darkness. She was among the first dressed and ready, earning an approving nod from the instructor who had initiated the wake-up call. The run began at a moderate pace, but gradually increased in intensity as the instructors tested the candidates' ability to maintain formation and communicate while under physical stress. Sarah found her position in the middle of the pack, running smoothly and breathing easily despite the early hour and challenging pace. Morrison, despite his impressive physique, began to struggle as the run extended beyond his comfort zone. His football training had emphasized short bursts of explosive activity rather than sustained endurance. As they completed the final mile of the run, Sarah noticed that several candidates were beginning to fall behind the main group. The instructors made note of these individuals, but did not immediately eliminate anyone from the exercise. Instead, they used the struggling candidates as teaching examples, pointing out the importance of consistent training and proper pacing during extended operations. "In the field, your team moves at the speed of its slowest member," Senior Chief Rodriguez explained during the post-run briefing. "If you can't maintain the pace, you become a liability that could cost lives. Every one of you needs to be capable of sustained performance under adverse conditions." This lesson resonated with Sarah, who had learned similar principles during hunting expeditions with her grandfather. The success of a mission often depended on the ability of all participants to maintain their performance even when fatigue, weather, or unexpected obstacles created additional challenges. Individual excellence meant nothing if it couldn't be sustained when the team needed it most. The remainder of the morning was spent in classroom instruction covering the history and mission of SEAL teams. Sarah found herself fascinated by the evolution of naval special warfare tactics and the innovative approaches that had been developed to address changing threats around the world. She took detailed notes and asked thoughtful questions that demonstrated her genuine interest in the subject matter beyond simply passing tests. During lunch break, she overheard conversations between several male candidates expressing doubt about whether the women in the program would be able to complete the more demanding physical challenges. Morrison was particularly vocal in his skepticism, predicting that all three women would wash out before the end of the first month. "It's not about being sexist," he explained to a group of listeners. "It's just biology. When we get to log PT and boat races, upper body strength is going to matter more than determination. I'm not saying they're not tough, but tough only goes so far when physics gets involved." Thompson disagreed with this assessment. "I've seen small guys outperform big guys plenty of times," he argued. "Technique, teamwork, and mental toughness can overcome a lot of physical disadvantages. Besides, SEAL operations require more than just brute strength." Sarah appreciated Thompson's perspective, but realized that she would ultimately need to prove herself through performance rather than relying on others to defend her potential. She had faced similar doubts throughout her military career and had learned that the most effective response was consistent excellence in everything she did. The afternoon brought their first exposure to the obstacle course that would become a central part of their daily routine. The course was designed to test not only individual physical capabilities, but also problem-solving skills and the ability to help teammates overcome challenges. Sarah studied each obstacle carefully, analyzing the most efficient approaches and identifying where teamwork would be essential for success. When her turn came to attempt the course, she moved with deliberate precision rather than rushing through each challenge. At the rope climb, she used a technique her grandfather had taught her for ascending hunting stands, wrapping her legs around the rope to take weight off her arms and conserve energy for the obstacles that followed. Her time was respectable, though not the fastest in the group. Morrison completed the course with impressive raw power, essentially muscling his way through obstacles that required more finesse from smaller candidates. However, Sarah noted that his technique was inefficient and would likely lead to exhaustion during longer training evolutions. Thompson and Chin both demonstrated solid technical skills, completing the course with smooth, practiced movements that suggested they would improve quickly with practice. "Not bad for a first attempt," Rodriguez commented as the candidates gathered for debriefing. "Some of you relied too heavily on strength instead of technique. Others were too cautious and lost time being overly precise. The key is finding the balance between speed and efficiency that allows you to complete the mission while conserving energy for what comes next." As the day ended and the candidates returned to their barracks, Sarah reflected on the lessons learned during their first full day of training. She had performed adequately in all the challenges presented, but she knew that the real tests were still ahead. The instructors were still evaluating baseline capabilities and establishing training rhythms. Soon, they would begin the systematic process of identifying weaknesses and pushing every candidate beyond their comfort zones. That evening, she wrote a brief letter to her grandfather, describing her first day and thanking him for the years of preparation that had made her success possible. She didn't mention the doubts expressed by some of her fellow candidates or the pressure she felt as one of only 3 women in the program. Instead, she focused on the positive aspects of the training and her determination to honor the lessons he had taught her about perseverance and quiet competence. Before lights out, she spent time reviewing the training materials for the next day and visualizing her performance on the upcoming challenges. This mental preparation had been a key component of her success throughout her military career, allowing her to rehearse successful outcomes and identify potential problems before they occurred in reality. As she lay in her bunk listening to the quiet conversations of her roommates, Sarah felt a sense of cautious optimism about the journey ahead. She had survived the first day without making any major mistakes or drawing negative attention from the instructors. More importantly, she had begun the process of earning respect through performance rather than demanding it through argument. The road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with challenges that would test every aspect of her physical, mental, and emotional preparation. But she was exactly where she had dreamed of being for years, and she was determined to make the most of the opportunity regardless of what obstacles lay ahead. 3 weeks into training, the initial politeness between candidates had given way to the raw competition that characterized SEAL selection. The daily schedule had intensified dramatically, with physical training beginning before dawn and continuing well into the evening. Academic instruction covered everything from weapons systems and explosive ordnance to foreign languages and cultural awareness. Each day brought new challenges designed to identify weaknesses and push candidates beyond their perceived limitations. Sarah had established herself as a consistent performer across all training evolutions. While she rarely finished first in purely physical competitions, she never finished last either. More importantly, she had demonstrated the kind of steady reliability that instructors valued in operational personnel. Her technical knowledge was impressive, her attention to detail was meticulous, and she had begun earning grudging respect from classmates who had initially doubted her capabilities. The breakthrough moment came during small unit tactics training. The candidates were divided into four-person teams and tasked with planning and executing a simulated reconnaissance mission. Each team received identical intelligence briefings and objectives, but they were allowed to develop their own approaches to completing the mission successfully. Sarah found herself teamed with Morrison, Chun, and a quiet candidate named Rodriguez who had previously served as a Navy EOD technician. Morrison immediately assumed leadership of the group, his natural confidence and imposing physical presence making him the obvious choice in his own mind. However, as they began analyzing the mission parameters, it became clear that leadership and tactical planning were very different skills. "We'll approach from the north," Morrison declared, pointing at the topographical map spread between them. "It's the most direct route to the objective, and we can use speed to compensate for any exposure during the movement phase." Sarah studied the map more carefully, noting details that Morrison had overlooked in his rush to establish dominance. The northern approach offered the shortest distance, but it also required crossing two open areas where the team would be visible to enemy observers. The terrain features that Morrison dismissed as irrelevant would actually provide excellent concealment for a more indirect, but ultimately safer approach. "What about coming in from the west?" she suggested quietly. "The ridgeline would provide cover for most of the movement, and there's a draw that leads directly to the observation point without exposing us to the patrol routes marked in the intelligence summary." Morrison glanced at the map briefly, then shook his head. "Too complicated. We'll stick with the direct approach. Speed and aggression are what win battles." Chun looked uncomfortable with Morrison's plan, but seemed reluctant to challenge his authority directly. Rodriguez nodded agreement with Sarah's assessment, but also appeared unwilling to create conflict within the team. Sarah realized that she faced a choice between maintaining team harmony and advocating for what she believed was the tactically superior approach. She chose tactical excellence over social comfort. "The direct approach puts us in the open for 12 minutes of movement time," she explained, tracing the route on the map with her finger. "According to the intelligence summary, enemy patrols cycle through those areas every 15 minutes. Even if we time it perfectly, we'll be cutting it very close. The western approach takes longer, but keeps us in cover for the entire movement." Morrison's face flushed with irritation. "Look, I appreciate your input, but I've been making tactical decisions longer than you've been in the military. We're going with my plan." This statement was factually incorrect, as Sarah's service record was actually longer than Morrison's, but she chose not to point out this error. Instead, she looked to Chun and Rodriguez for support. Chun finally spoke up, his voice careful but firm. "Sarah's right about the patrol timing," he said. "I've been calculating the windows, and the northern route doesn't give us enough margin for error. If we hit any delays or complications, we'll be exposed when the next patrol comes through." Rodriguez nodded agreement. "The western route also gives us better escape options if things go wrong. The northern approach leaves us trapped if we're compromised." Morrison found himself outnumbered 3-1, but his pride prevented him from gracefully accepting the team's input. "Fine," he said curtly. "We'll do it your way. But when this takes too long and we miss our reporting deadline, don't blame me for the failure." The mission began at dawn the following morning. The four teams moved out simultaneously, each following their chosen approach to the objective. Sarah's team used the western route she had recommended, moving carefully through the ridgeline terrain while maintaining constant communication and security protocols. Morrison's prediction about timing proved incorrect. The indirect route actually allowed for faster movement because the team could advance with confidence rather than constantly stopping to check for enemy observation. The terrain features provided such good concealment that they reached their observation point 15 minutes ahead of schedule and with no exposure to enemy forces. From their concealed position, they conducted the required reconnaissance activities, gathered the specified intelligence, and prepared for their withdrawal. As they organized their equipment for the return movement, they heard distant voices from the valley below. Two of the other teams had chosen direct approaches similar to Morrison's original plan, and both had been detected by the opposing forces that were playing the role of enemy patrols. Looks like the longer route was the right choice after all, Shin commented quietly as they watched the captured teams being escorted to a detention area for interrogation exercises. Morrison said nothing, but Sarah noticed that his attitude toward her suggestions became noticeably more receptive during the remainder of the training evolution. By the time they completed their mission and returned to base for debriefing, he had begun asking for her input on tactical questions rather than dismissing her contributions automatically. The debriefing session reinforced the lessons learned during the exercise. The instructors praised the teams that had chosen indirect approaches and emphasized the importance of thorough planning over aggressive execution. Senior Chief Rodriguez specifically mentioned Sarah's team as an example of effective tactical decision-making under pressure. Mitchell's route selection demonstrated the kind of analytical thinking we need in operational planning, he told the assembled candidates. Sometimes the longest way around is the shortest way home. Speed means nothing if it gets your team killed or captured. This public recognition marked a turning point in Sarah's relationship with her classmates. Morrison began seeking her input on planning exercises, and other candidates started including her in informal study groups and tactical discussions. She had proven herself not through physical dominance, but through competent performance and sound judgment under pressure. However, not all of her fellow candidates were equally accepting of her success. A group of candidates led by Brian Walsh, a former Marine who had transferred to the Navy for SEAL training, viewed the inclusion of women in the program as a political experiment that undermined the traditional standards of the teams. Walsh was careful never to express these views openly where instructors might overhear, but he made his feelings clear through subtle comments and deliberate exclusion from group activities. "I'm not saying she's not smart," Walsh would say when discussing Sarah's performance. "But when we get to the really hard stuff like Hell Week, being able to analyze a map isn't going to matter. It's going to come down to raw physical and mental toughness, and that's where biology becomes a factor." Walsh's influence began affecting team dynamics during training exercises. When candidates were allowed to choose their own teams for certain evolutions, Sarah noticed that she was increasingly excluded from groups that included Walsh's supporters. This forced her to work with whoever remained available, often candidates who were struggling academically or physically. Rather than complaining about this treatment, Sarah used it as an opportunity to develop her leadership skills. She found herself working with candidates who needed additional help understanding tactical concepts or improving their physical performance. By investing time in bringing these teammates up to standard, she gained valuable experience in the mentoring and development roles that would be important in her future career. One evening, she was working with Jake Martinez, a candidate who struggled with academic subjects despite excellent physical capabilities. They were reviewing demolitions calculations in the base library when Walsh and several of his supporters entered the study area. "Tutoring session?" Walsh asked with barely concealed sarcasm. "That's real cute. Are you going to hold his hand during Hell Week too?" Martinez looked embarrassed by the attention and started gathering his materials to leave. Sarah realized that Walsh's comment was designed not only to belittle her teaching efforts, but also to humiliate Martinez for accepting help from a woman. She faced another choice between avoiding conflict and standing up for both herself and her study partner. "Martinez is going to pass his next exam because he's willing to put in extra work," she replied calmly. "That's the kind of attitude that gets people through tough training. Maybe you should worry more about your own preparation instead of what other people are doing." Walsh's face darkened at this response. He stepped closer to Sarah's table, using his physical size to intimidate her. "Maybe you should worry about whether you belong here at all. This isn't some equal opportunity experiment. People's lives are going to depend on whether team members can carry their weight when things get real." The library had gone quiet as other study groups stopped their work to observe the confrontation. Sarah remained seated, refusing to be drawn into a physical display of aggression that would only reinforce Walsh's narrative about women being unsuitable for the program. "My performance speaks for itself," she said quietly. "If you have concerns about my capabilities, I'm sure the instructors would be happy to discuss your observations with you." This response put Walsh in an impossible position. He couldn't escalate the confrontation without appearing to bully a smaller opponent, but backing down would undermine his authority with his supporters. He chose to withdraw while maintaining his aggressive posture. "We'll see how you do when the real testing starts," he said as he turned away. Talking tough in the library is different from performing when lives are on the line. Martinez waited until Walsh's group left the area before speaking. "Thanks for not backing down," he said quietly. "That took guts." "It took common sense," Sarah replied. "Bullies only have power if you give it to them. Besides, he's not wrong about the real testing coming up. We need to focus on being ready for whatever they throw at us." The real testing that Walsh had referenced was Hell Week, the legendary ordeal that served as the culmination of the first phase of SEAL training. During 5.5 days of continuous training evolution, candidates would be pushed to their absolute physical and mental limits. Sleep deprivation, extreme physical challenges, and constant pressure from instructors combined to create conditions that eliminated roughly half of all candidates. As Hell Week approached, the training intensity increased even further. Candidates were subjected to longer runs, more demanding obstacle courses, and complex tactical scenarios that required split-second decision-making under extreme stress. The academic load also intensified, with examinations covering everything from weapons systems to foreign language vocabulary. Sarah maintained her consistent performance across all training areas, but she could feel the mounting pressure affecting her classmates in different ways. Some candidates became increasingly aggressive and competitive, viewing every interaction as a zero-sum contest for survival. Others withdrew into themselves, focusing entirely on individual preparation while avoiding any activities that might expose weaknesses. Morrison had evolved into one of Sarah's most reliable teammates, having learned to value her tactical insights and steady performance under pressure. Chun remained the quiet professional he had always been, but his confidence had grown noticeably as he excelled in water-based training evolutions. Rodriguez had emerged as an expert in explosives and demolitions, earning praise from instructors for his technical knowledge and safety consciousness. The three women in the program had taken different approaches to the mounting pressure. Lieutenant Jennifer Park had struggled with some of the physical demands, but compensated with excellent academic performance and strong leadership skills during tactical exercises. Petty Officer Maria Santos had proven herself as one of the strongest swimmers in the class and had developed a reputation for fearless aggression during combat training scenarios. Sarah had found her niche as the analytical problem solver who could be relied upon for sound tactical advice and consistent performance across all training areas. While she had never been the best performer in any single category, her overall competence had earned respect from both instructors and classmates. The week before Hell Week began, the candidates underwent final medical examinations and equipment inspections. The mood in the barracks was tense as everyone made their final preparations for the ordeal ahead. Some candidates wrote letters to family members, not knowing whether they would complete the program successfully. Others focused on last-minute physical conditioning or mental preparation techniques. Sarah spent her final evening before Hell Week reviewing her training notes and visualizing successful performance during the challenges she expected to face. She had learned during her grandfather's hunting expeditions that mental preparation was often more important than physical conditioning when facing extreme challenges. The mind would quit long before the body reached its actual limits, so training the mind to push through discomfort and doubt was essential for success. As she prepared her gear for the morning inspection, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 3 weeks earlier, she had been just another candidate trying to prove herself worthy of consideration. Now, she was recognized as a valuable team member whose contributions were sought by classmates and acknowledged by instructors. The transformation hadn't occurred because of dramatic heroics or confrontational victories over skeptics. Instead, It had resulted from consistent competent performance and the quiet demonstration of capabilities under increasingly challenging conditions. She had learned that earning respect was a gradual process that required patience, humility, and unwavering commitment to excellence. But Hell Week would test all of these lessons in ways that no previous training had approached. The sleep deprivation, physical exhaustion, and mental pressure would strip away all pretense and reveal the true character of every candidate. Sarah knew that some of her classmates would discover reserves of strength they never knew they possessed, while others would find that their perceived toughness crumbled under the relentless pressure of the training evolution. She also knew that her performance during Hell Week would be scrutinized more closely than that of any male candidate. Success would be attributed to lowered standards or special consideration, while failure would be cited as evidence that women lacked the capabilities required for SEAL operations. This additional pressure was unfair, but it was also a reality that she had accepted when she decided to pursue this path. As lights out approached, Morrison stopped by her bunk for a brief conversation. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "When we started this program, I had some pretty stupid ideas about who belonged here and who didn't. You've proven me wrong about a lot of things." "No apology necessary," Sarah replied. "We all had learning to do. The important thing is that we figured out how to work together when it mattered." Morrison nodded. "Tomorrow starts the real test. I want you to know that if we end up on the same boat crew, you'll have my complete support. No reservations, no doubts. Just teamwork." This conversation was significant because Morrison had become an informal leader among the candidates, and his public support would influence how other classmates treated Sarah during the grueling days ahead. She appreciated his honesty and his willingness to admit that his initial judgments had been wrong. As she settled into her bunk for what might be her last full night of sleep for the next 6 days, Sarah felt as prepared as anyone could be for the ordeal ahead. She had trained her body to function under extreme stress, prepared her mind to push through pain and exhaustion, and earned the respect of teammates who would be crucial for mutual survival during the challenges to come. Hell Week would demand everything she had to give, and more than she thought was possible. But she had overcome every obstacle placed before her so far, and she was determined to continue that record regardless of what tomorrow might bring. The real test was about to begin, and she was ready to prove that determination and competence mattered more than size or gender when survival was on the line. Hell Week began at midnight on Sunday with the sound of automatic weapons fire, explosions, and shouting instructors descending upon the sleeping candidates like avenging angels. Sarah jolted awake to find her barracks filled with smoke, strobing lights, and the overwhelming noise of simulated combat. Instructors in full battle gear moved between the bunks, screaming orders and demanding immediate compliance with contradictory commands. Get up, get down, push-ups, sit-ups, on your feet, hit the deck. The verbal assault was designed to create maximum confusion and stress from the very first moment. Candidates stumbled through the darkness, trying to follow orders while their minds struggled to process the sudden transition from sleep to chaos. Sarah's years of training with her grandfather had included similar surprise exercises designed to test her ability to function under unexpected pressure. She remained calm despite the overwhelming sensory input, focusing on completing each task as it was given rather than trying to anticipate what might come next. This mental discipline allowed her to perform better than candidates who became overwhelmed by the apparent randomness of the instructions. The initial chaos lasted for over an hour, with candidates being driven through a series of physical exercises, uniform changes, and equipment inspections that seemed to have no logical purpose beyond creating maximum stress and confusion. Several candidates were already showing signs of panic, their movements becoming increasingly frantic as they tried to keep up with the impossible pace of contradictory demands. Finally, the candidates were herded onto the beach for their first official training evolution. Senior Chief Rodriguez and his team of instructors stood before them in the pre-dawn darkness, their faces painted with camouflage and their expressions completely serious. "Welcome to Hell Week," Rodriguez announced. "For the next 5.5 days, you will be tested in ways that will push you beyond every limit you thought you had. You will be cold, wet, exhausted, and miserable, Some of you will quit. Some of you will be injured. Some of you will discover that you have reserves of strength and determination that you never knew existed. He paused to let these words sink in before continuing. The purpose of Hell Week is not to torture you for entertainment. It is to simulate the stress and exhaustion that you will face during actual combat operations. When lives depend on your performance, you cannot afford to quit just because you're uncomfortable. You cannot let your teammates down just because you're tired. You cannot make mistakes just because conditions are difficult. The first evolution was surf torture, a deceptively simple exercise that involved sitting in the ocean surf while linking arms with fellow candidates. As the cold Pacific Ocean waves crashed over them repeatedly, the candidates were required to maintain their formation while instructors questioned them about tactical procedures, weapon specifications, and military history. Sarah found herself between Morrison and Chun, their linked arms providing mutual support against the force of the waves. The water temperature was barely above 50 degrees, and within minutes she could feel the cold penetrating through her uniform and into her core. Her muscles began to shiver involuntarily, and her teeth chattered despite her efforts to control the response. Mitchell, an instructor, shouted over the sound of the waves. "What is the effective range of an M4 carbine?" 550 meters, instructor, she responded, forcing her voice to remain strong despite the cold and the water that kept washing over her face. "Wrong," the instructor shouted back. "The effective range is 570 meters. Drop and give me 20 push-ups." Sarah knew that her original answer had been correct according to the technical specifications they had studied in class, but arguing with instructors during Hell Week was pointless and counterproductive. She released her grip on her teammates' arms and performed the required push-ups in the sand while waves continued to crash over her position. The surf torture continued for over an hour, with candidates being constantly questioned, criticized, and given additional exercises as punishment for perceived failures. Several candidates began showing signs of hypothermia, their speech becoming slurred, and their movements increasingly uncoordinated. The instructors watched these developments carefully, ready to intervene if anyone's condition became dangerous. When the evolution finally ended, the candidates were ordered to their feet for an immediate run to the next training site. Sarah's muscles were stiff and unresponsive from the cold, but she forced herself to maintain pace with the group as they jogged through the base toward the obstacle course. The movement helped restore circulation and warmth to her extremities, though her uniform remained soaked and uncomfortable. The obstacle course had been modified for Hell Week with additional challenges and higher standards for completion. Candidates were required to complete the course while carrying heavy packs and weapons, adding significantly to the physical demands of each obstacle. Teams were formed randomly for boat races, log PT, and other evolutions that required coordinated effort from multiple participants. Sarah found herself assigned to a boat crew with 6 other candidates, including Walsh, who had been one of her most vocal critics during the preparatory phases of training. The boat crew would function as a unit for most Hell Week evolutions, meaning that individual success was entirely dependent on group performance. Weak links would drag down the entire team, while strong performers could help carry struggling teammates through difficult challenges. Walsh immediately attempted to establish himself as the boat crew leader, his aggressive personality and imposing physical presence making him a natural choice for the role. However, boat crew leadership during Hell Week was more about coordination and motivation than command authority, and his confrontational style quickly created friction within the group. "Listen up, people," Walsh announced as they prepared for their first boat race. "I've done this kind of training before in the Marines, so follow my lead and we'll get through this thing. Anyone who can't keep up needs to speak up now so we can figure out how to compensate." His comment was clearly directed at Sarah, though he was careful not to identify her specifically. She chose not to respond to the provocation, instead focusing on learning the proper techniques for lifting and carrying the heavy rubber boat that would be their constant companion for the next several days. The boat races involved teams of 7 candidates lifting their boat overhead and running along the beach for specified distances. The boats weighed over 200 pounds when dry and significantly more when filled with sand and water from previous exercises. Coordination was essential because uneven lifting could cause the boat to shift dramatically, potentially injuring team members or slowing overall progress. Walsh positioned himself at the front of the boat where he could control the pace and direction of movement. Sarah was assigned to the middle position where her smaller size would have less impact on overall stability. As they prepared for their first race, she studied the technique being used by other boat crews and noticed several key points that could improve their performance. If we coordinate our breathing and steps, we can maintain a steadier pace, she suggested during their brief preparation period. The crews that are staying in sync are moving faster with less energy expenditure. Walsh dismissed her observation without consideration. We'll be fine if everyone just follows my pace and doesn't overthink it. This is about heart, not technique. The first boat race proved Walsh wrong in painful fashion. Their lack of coordination caused the boat to bounce and shift constantly, requiring extra energy to maintain control while reducing their overall speed. They finished fourth out of 6 boat crews, a disappointing result that earned them criticism from the instructors and additional physical exercises as punishment. That was pathetic, the lead instructor shouted at them after they completed their penalty push-ups. You're carrying that boat like a sack of groceries instead of operating as a coordinated team. Figure out how to work together, or you'll be doing extra training evolutions until you get it right. During the brief rest period before their next evolution, Chen approached Sarah with a suggestion. You were right about the coordination issue, he said quietly. Maybe Walsh needs to hear it from more than one person before he'll consider changing his approach. Sarah appreciated the support, but she had learned that direct confrontation with Walsh rarely produced positive results. Instead, she waited for an opportunity to demonstrate the effectiveness of her suggested technique rather than arguing about it theoretically. That opportunity came during their second boat race, when Walsh stumbled in the soft sand and lost his grip on the boat. Sarah immediately moved forward to take his position, calling out a steady rhythm for the team to follow. The other team members instinctively matched her pace, and their coordination improved dramatically despite the leadership change. They completed the second race in first place among the 6 boat crews, earning praise from instructors and avoiding penalty exercises. Walsh regained his position after recovering from his stumble, but the team's improved performance had made it obvious that Sarah's coordination techniques were more effective than his aggressive but unstructured approach. Good job on that race, Walsh admitted grudgingly during their next rest period. Maybe we should try that rhythm thing on a more regular basis. This was as close to an apology as Sarah expected to receive from Walsh, and she accepted it as a sign that their boat crew was beginning to function more effectively. The remaining boat races that day were completed with steadily improving times and coordination, establishing them as one of the stronger teams in their training class. However, boat races were only one component of Hell Week training. The candidates also faced log PT, a grueling evolution that required teams to lift, carry, and manipulate telephone poles that weighed over 300 pounds. The logs were used for a variety of exercises including overhead presses, squats, lunges, and relay races that demanded both individual strength and group coordination. Log PT exposed the physical limitations of smaller candidates more than any other evolution. Sarah could contribute to team lifts and carries, but her reduced leverage and muscle mass meant that larger teammates had to compensate for the difference in capability. This created exactly the kind of situation that critics of women in SEAL training had predicted, where team performance suffered due to physical disparities between members. Walsh, despite his improved cooperation during boat races, began expressing frustration with Sarah's performance during log PT. We're getting killed because we can't match the lifting power of the other teams, he complained during a rest period. Everyone else has 7 guys who can pull their weight with the log. We've got 6 guys carrying extra load to compensate for our weak link. His criticism was factually accurate in terms of raw physical capability, but it ignored Sarah's contributions to team coordination and problem-solving. During complex log PT evolutions that required precise timing and positioning, her analysis and communication had helped their team avoid mistakes that had plagued other groups. Morrison, who had become one of Sarah's strongest supporters, defended her contributions during this discussion. She might not be the strongest lifter, But she's the reason we haven't screwed up any of the technical parts, he pointed out. When the instructors were explaining that complicated sequence with the log rotations, she's the one who made sure everyone understood the timing. The team that got first place in lifting came in last because they couldn't figure out the coordination requirements. Chen nodded agreement with Morrison's assessment. Physical strength is only part of what we're being tested on. Problem-solving, leadership, and teamwork are just as important for actual operations. Walsh remained unconvinced by these arguments, viewing them as rationalization for accepting reduced performance standards. The tension within their boat crew continued to simmer beneath the surface, occasionally erupting into heated exchanges during particularly stressful moments. The situation came to a head during the third day of Hell Week, when exhaustion and sleep deprivation had begun affecting everyone's judgment and emotional control. The candidates had been awake for over 60 hours with only brief catnaps allowed between training evolutions. Their uniforms were constantly wet from surf torture and beach training. Their bodies were covered with sand and salt, and their minds were operating in a state of controlled delirium. During a particularly challenging log PT evolution, their team dropped the log twice due to coordination failures. Walsh exploded in frustration, directing his anger at Sarah despite the fact that the coordination breakdowns had occurred when other team members failed to follow the established timing protocols. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he shouted, his voice carrying across the training area where other boat crews could hear every word. "We're getting hammered because we're trying to accommodate someone who doesn't belong here. This isn't a social experiment. It's supposed to prepare us for combat." The training area went silent as other candidates stopped their exercises to watch the confrontation. The instructors also took notice, moving closer to observe how the situation would develop. Sarah realized that her response to Walsh's outburst would be scrutinized by everyone present and could influence perceptions about women in SEAL training for years to come. She chose to address his concerns directly rather than deflecting or becoming defensive. "You're right that I can't lift as much as you can," she said calmly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "But strength is only one factor in team performance. If you want to blame someone for our coordination problems, blame the guy who keeps changing the lifting rhythm without telling the rest of the team." This response put the focus back on technical performance rather than gender-based capabilities. It also demonstrated that Sarah was willing to accept responsibility for her limitations while holding teammates accountable for their own mistakes. Walsh started to respond angrily, but Senior Chief Rodriguez intervened before the situation could escalate further. "Enough," Rodriguez shouted. "This is exactly the kind of team breakdown that gets people killed in real operations. You're so busy arguing about who's to blame that you've stopped focusing on how to solve the problem. Drop and give me 50, all of you." The entire boat crew performed the required push-ups while Rodriguez continued his lecture about teamwork and accountability. When they finished the exercise, he addressed the broader issue that had created the confrontation. "Every team has members with different capabilities," he explained. "The mark of a professional is learning how to maximize everyone's contributions while minimizing their limitations. If you can't figure out how to work together during training, you'll never survive contact with the enemy." This lesson resonated with most of the boat crew members, who had been caught up in the stress and exhaustion of Hell Week rather than thinking strategically about team dynamics. Walsh remained silent during Rodriguez's lecture, but his body language suggested that he was reconsidering his approach to the situation. The remainder of the log PT evolution was completed with notably improved coordination and communication. Sarah continued to contribute at her maximum capability, while other team members adjusted their techniques to accommodate the physical differences within the group. Their performance improved significantly, and they avoided further confrontations or coordination breakdowns. That evening, during one of the brief rest periods allowed between training evolutions, Sarah found herself reflecting on the lessons learned during the log PT confrontation. She had successfully defended herself against Walsh's criticism while maintaining focus on team performance rather than personal grievances. More importantly, she had demonstrated the kind of professionalism under pressure that Rodriguez and other instructors were evaluating throughout Hell Week. But the physical challenges of Hell Week were only beginning to test her limits. The combination of sleep deprivation, constant cold and wetness, and relentless physical demands was affecting every candidate in different ways. Some were becoming increasingly emotional and unstable. Others were withdrawing into themselves and losing the ability to communicate effectively with teammates. A few were beginning to show signs of serious physical breakdown that would require medical intervention. Sarah had managed to maintain her mental clarity and physical performance better than many of her classmates, but she could feel the cumulative effects of the training beginning to affect her capabilities. Her reaction times were slower, her decision-making process required more conscious effort, and her body was operating on reserves of strength that she hadn't known existed. The next phase of Hell Week would introduce even more challenging evolutions designed to test candidates' ability to function as a team when individual capabilities were pushed beyond normal limits. Rock portage exercises would require precise coordination while candidates maneuvered boats through dangerous surf conditions. Around-the-world paddles would test endurance and navigation skills during extended periods of physical exertion. Most significantly, the instructors would begin introducing psychological pressure designed to encourage candidates to voluntarily withdraw from training. The famous bell that candidates could ring to indicate their decision to quit would become an increasingly tempting option as exhaustion and discomfort reached levels that most people had never experienced. Sarah knew that the most dangerous part of Hell Week was still ahead. Physical challenges could be overcome through preparation and determination, but the mental warfare that the instructors were about to unleash would test her psychological resilience in ways that no previous training could have fully prepared her for. As she prepared for another night of minimal sleep and maximum stress, she reminded herself of the lessons her grandfather had taught her about perseverance during extended hardships. The key was to focus on the next immediate challenge rather than trying to contemplate the entire ordeal ahead. One evolution at a time, 1 hour at a time, one decision at a time. That was the only way to maintain sanity and effectiveness when conditions exceeded human tolerances. The bell was always there for candidates who decided they couldn't continue. But Sarah had not come this far and endured this much to quit when the testing reached its most intense phase. Hell Week would demand everything she had to give, but she was determined to prove that her place among the candidates was earned through performance rather than granted through accommodation. By Thursday morning of Hell Week, the training compound had been transformed into a testing ground for human endurance that pushed every remaining candidate beyond the boundaries of normal experience. 43 candidates had started the week, only 28 remained. The sound of the brass bell still echoed in Sarah's memory from the night before, when 3 more classmates had reached their breaking point and chosen to end their participation in the program. Sarah herself felt like a shadow of the person who had begun training months earlier. Her hands were raw and bleeding from rope work and constant immersion in salt water. Her legs trembled with exhaustion even during brief rest periods. Her mind operated in a strange state somewhere between alertness and hallucination, where reality seemed fluid and concentration required enormous effort. But she was still there, still functioning, still determined to see this ordeal through to its conclusion. The most recent departures had included Martinez, the candidate she had tutored in the library weeks earlier. He had struggled with the academic portions of training, but had shown tremendous heart during the physical challenges. The combination of sleep deprivation and hypothermia had finally overcome his determination during Wednesday night's extended surf torture session. As he rang the bell and walked away from the program, Sarah had felt genuine sadness for a good man who had given everything he had to give. The departures also included one of the other women in the program. Lieutenant Jennifer Park had performed admirably throughout most of Hell Week, but a combination of factors had finally forced her withdrawal. During Tuesday's rock portage exercise, she had suffered a minor injury to her shoulder that became progressively worse as the training continued. By Wednesday evening, the injury combined with exhaustion had reduced her performance to a level where she was becoming a liability to her boat crew's safety. Park's departure left only Sarah and Petty Officer Maria Santos as female representatives in a program that had begun with 3. The symbolism was not lost on anyone, including the instructors who had been carefully monitoring the women's performance throughout the week. Every evolution now carried additional weight as observers evaluated whether the inclusion of women in SEAL training was viable or simply a politically motivated experiment doomed to failure. Santos had taken a different approach to Hell Week than Sarah, relying primarily on aggressive determination and superior swimming ability to overcome the challenges placed before her. She had established herself as one of the strongest water-based performers in the entire class, often finishing first in swimming evolutions and demonstrating fearless aggression during surf torture sessions. However, Santos's confrontational approach had created friction with some of her teammates, particularly during evolutions that required subtle coordination rather than raw physical performance. Her boat crew had experienced several internal conflicts, and there were rumors that some of her teammates were actively hoping for her departure so they could function more cohesively as a unit. Sarah had chosen a different strategy, focusing on consistent competence across all training areas while building strong relationships with teammates who had learned to value her tactical insights and steady performance under pressure. Her boat crew had evolved into one of the more effective units in the class, with Walsh's initial hostility having been replaced by grudging respect for her contributions. Thursday's training schedule introduced the candidates to one of Hell Week's most psychologically challenging evolutions, Around the World Paddle. This exercise required boat crews to paddle their rubber boats completely around a designated course that could take anywhere from 6 to 12 hours to complete, depending on weather conditions and crew performance. The physical demands of continuous paddling for such extended periods were obvious, but the real test was mental. Hours of repetitive motion while fighting wind, waves, and exhaustion created conditions where candidates' minds could play tricks on them. Hallucinations were common during around-the-world paddles, as were emotional breakdowns and panic attacks brought on by the combination of claustrophobia and open water exposure. Sarah's boat crew gathered around their assigned vessel as instructors provided final briefings on safety procedures and navigation requirements. The weather forecast called for increasing winds and deteriorating sea conditions throughout the day, adding an element of genuine danger to an already challenging evolution. Remember that this is not a race, Senior Chief Rodriguez emphasized during his briefing. Crews that try to rush will make mistakes that could cost lives. Navigate carefully, communicate constantly, and look out for each other. We'll have safety boats monitoring your progress, but you need to be prepared to handle emergencies on your own. Walsh had gradually evolved into an effective boat crew leader, learning to balance his natural aggressiveness with the coordination skills that Sarah and other teammates brought to the group. As they prepared to launch, he gathered the crew for a final discussion of their strategy and individual responsibilities. Mitchell will be our primary navigator, he announced, a decision that would have been unthinkable at the beginning of Hell Week. She's got the best map-reading skills and has been keeping track of tide conditions. Chun and Rodriguez will alternate as primary paddlers to maintain our pace. Morrison and Thompson will handle boat security and watch for other traffic. This delegation of responsibilities represented significant growth in Walsh's leadership approach and recognition of each team member's individual strengths. Sarah appreciated the trust that had been placed in her navigational abilities, particularly given the safety implications of making mistakes during extended open water operations. The launch went smoothly despite challenging surf conditions that had been building throughout the morning. Sarah's crew coordinated their paddling effectively, maintaining their position within the designated safety corridor while making steady progress along the prescribed route. The other boat crews spread out along the course as different teams adopted varying strategies for managing the long-duration evolution. 2 hours into the paddle, Sarah began noticing signs that the weather was deteriorating more rapidly than the morning forecast had predicted. The wind had shifted direction and increased in intensity, creating larger waves and more difficult paddling conditions. More concerning was the development of a fog bank that was moving in from the ocean, threatening to reduce visibility to dangerous levels. "We need to consider adjusting our route," she advised Walsh during one of their brief rest periods. "The fog is going to make navigation much more difficult, and these wave conditions are going to get worse before they get better." Walsh studied the approaching weather systems before nodding agreement with her assessment. "What do you recommend?" There's a protected cove about 2 miles ahead that would give us shelter if conditions get really bad, Sarah explained, pointing to the relevant features on their waterproof chart. We could continue with the original route if the weather stabilizes, or use the cove as a staging area if we need to wait for better conditions. This kind of tactical flexibility was exactly what the instructors wanted to see from candidates during challenging evolutions. Rather than blindly following the original plan regardless of changing circumstances, effective teams needed to adapt their approach based on real-time conditions while maintaining focus on their overall objectives. Walsh made the decision to continue with the original route while keeping the alternate plan as a backup option. The crew resumed paddling, but within 30 minutes it became clear that Sarah's weather concerns had been justified. The fog bank enveloped their position, reducing visibility to less than 50 yards and making navigation significantly more challenging. Worse, the deteriorating conditions were affecting other boat crews in potentially dangerous ways. Radio communications indicated that at least 2 crews were experiencing navigation difficulties, and one crew had reported a possible medical emergency involving a candidate who was showing signs of severe hypothermia. Safety boat, this is Crew 7, Walsh radioed to the instructor vessel that was monitoring their section of the course. We have good navigation capability and stable crew conditions. Request permission to assist with search operations if needed. This offer to help other crews despite the additional risks involved demonstrated the kind of selfless professionalism that SEAL training was designed to develop. Rather than focusing solely on their own successful completion of the evolution, Walsh's crew was prepared to accept additional hazards in order to assist teammates who were in distress. Crew 7, maintain your current position and stand by for tasking, came the response from the safety boat. We may need your navigation capabilities to help locate Crew 3, who are currently overdue at Checkpoint Charlie. Sarah immediately began calculating the most likely positions for the missing boat crew based on tide conditions, wind drift, and the timing of their last reported position. Her analysis suggested several possible locations where the crew might have been pushed off course by the deteriorating weather conditions. If they missed the checkpoint because of navigation errors, they're probably in one of 3 areas, she explained to Walsh while pointing out the relevant locations on their chart. The current and wind would push them toward these shallow areas where they might have run aground or gotten into trouble with surf conditions. Walsh relayed this analysis to the safety boat, along with their crew's offer to investigate the most likely areas systematically. Within minutes, they received authorization to begin search operations in coordination with other rescue assets that were being deployed to locate the missing candidates. The search mission transformed what had been an individual endurance test into a complex rescue operation that required all of Sarah's navigational skills and her crew's ability to function effectively under pressure. They methodically investigated each of the areas she had identified, using proper search patterns while maintaining communication with other rescue assets and avoiding hazards created by the poor weather conditions. After nearly 2 hours of systematic searching, they located Crew 3 in a shallow bay where their boat had been pushed ashore by wind and waves. The crew was exhausted and disoriented, but all members were in stable condition and able to continue with assistance. Sarah's navigation analysis had been accurate, and their crew's professional execution of the search mission had potentially prevented a serious emergency from becoming a tragedy. Outstanding work, Crew 7, came the radio message from Senior Chief Rodriguez. Your navigation and seamanship during this evolution has been exemplary. Return to base when ready. The successful completion of the search and rescue mission had taken most of the day, but it had provided Sarah's boat crew with exactly the kind of real-world application that SEAL training was designed to simulate. They had functioned as an effective team under genuinely dangerous conditions, making critical decisions that affected the safety of fellow candidates while maintaining their own operational capability. As they paddled back to base through calming weather conditions, Sarah reflected on how much her relationship with her teammates had evolved during Hell Week. Walsh's initial hostility had been replaced by genuine respect for her capabilities. Morrison had become a reliable ally who actively defended her contributions during discussions with other candidates. Chun and Rodriguez had learned to value her analytical approach to problem-solving during complex evolutions. Most importantly, she had proven to herself that she could function effectively under the extreme stress and physical demands that SEAL operations would require. The doubts that she had carried about her own capabilities had been replaced by quiet confidence in her ability to contribute meaningfully to team success regardless of the challenges involved. But Hell Week was not over. Thursday evening brought new evolutions designed to test candidates' ability to function when exhaustion reached levels that challenged basic motor skills and decision-making capabilities. The famous steel pier evolution would require precise teamwork during complex rope climbing exercises while candidates' hands were raw and their strength was depleted. Friday would bring the final surge of challenges before the coveted completion ceremony. Candidates who had survived this far would face their most difficult tests during the final 18 hours, when instructors would push them to their absolute limits while evaluating their readiness for the advanced phases of SEAL training. Sarah knew that she was close to achieving a goal that had seemed impossible when she first enlisted in the Navy. But she also knew that the final phase of Hell Week would test her resolve more severely than anything she had experienced so far. Candidates often quit during the last day, not because they couldn't complete the remaining challenges, but because the accumulated stress and exhaustion finally overwhelmed their determination to continue. The bell would continue to call to her until the moment Hell Week officially ended. Every candidate could hear its promise of immediate relief from pain, exhaustion, and stress. The temptation to quit would only grow stronger as the finish line approached, and the final challenges pushed her beyond what seemed humanly possible. But Sarah had invested too much of herself in reaching this point to quit when success was finally within reach. Her grandfather had taught her that the most important victories were achieved during the moments when continuing seemed impossible. This was such a moment, and she was determined to honor his lessons by finding the strength to endure whatever challenges remained. As her boat crew secured their vessel and prepared for evening evolutions, she made a silent promise to herself and to everyone who had supported her journey. She would complete Hell Week. She would earn her place among the candidates who advanced to the next phase of training. And she would prove that determination and competence mattered more than size or gender when it came to achieving excellence under pressure. The hardest part was still ahead, but she was ready for whatever tests awaited her during the final hours of this legendary ordeal. Friday morning arrived with a cruel irony that had broken many candidates in previous Hell Week classes. After 5 days of relentless punishment, the sun finally emerged from behind the persistent cloud cover that had dominated the week. Golden light streamed across the training compound, warming the air and creating almost pleasant conditions for what everyone knew would be the final and most challenging day of the ordeal. Sarah stood in formation with the 24 candidates who remained from the original class of 43. Her body was a collection of injuries and exhaustion that would have sent her to the hospital under normal circumstances. Her hands were wrapped in medical tape to protect wounds that had reopened repeatedly during rope work. Her legs trembled even while standing still. Her throat was raw from salt water and shouting commands during boat operations. But her eyes were clear and her determination was unshaken. Senior Chief Rodriguez addressed the survivors with uncharacteristic warmth in his voice. You have 18 hours remaining in Hell Week. 18 hours between you and an accomplishment that fewer than 1% of military personnel will ever achieve. The worst is behind you, but we're not done testing your limits yet. He paused to survey the assembled candidates, noting the transformation that 5 days of extreme stress had created in each individual. Today's evolutions are designed to test your ability to function as a team when your individual capabilities are pushed beyond normal human limits. Some of you will discover reserves of strength you never knew existed. Others will find that their perceived toughness crumbles when faced with the final challenges. The first evolution of the day was Steel Pier, a complex rope climbing exercise that required candidates to work in pairs while ascending and descending structures that extended over the ocean. The exercise tested not only individual climbing ability, but also trust between partners who were responsible for each other's safety during the challenging maneuvers. Sarah was paired with Chun, whose quiet competence had made him one of her most reliable teammates throughout Hell Week. They had worked together effectively during numerous evolutions, developing an intuitive understanding of each other's capabilities and limitations that would be essential during the demanding rope work ahead. The steel pier structure extended 50 feet above the water, with multiple levels connected by ropes that candidates were required to navigate while carrying equipment and maintaining constant communication with their partners. A fall from any level would result in immediate medical evacuation and elimination from the program. "You lead the first ascent," Chun suggested as they prepared their equipment. "Your rope work has been more consistent than mine, and I'd rather follow someone I trust during the technical sections." This vote of confidence meant more to Sarah than Chun probably realized. Throughout her military career, she had often been viewed with skepticism by male colleagues who questioned her capabilities in physically demanding situations. Having a proven professional like Chun express trust in her technical skills validated years of preparation and consistent performance. The steel pier ascent began smoothly, with Sarah setting a steady pace that allowed Chun to follow her movements while maintaining proper safety protocols. The rope work required precise technique rather than raw strength, an area where her smaller size and careful preparation provided advantages over larger candidates who tried to muscle their way through the challenges. Halfway through the ascent, they encountered the evolution's primary test, a section where both partners had to traverse a horizontal rope while maintaining physical contact with each other. This maneuver required absolute trust and coordination, as a mistake by either person could cause both candidates to fall into the ocean 50 feet below. "On my count," Sarah called softly, positioning herself to begin the traverse. 3, 2, 1, move. They began the crossing with Sarah leading and Chun maintaining contact through a safety line that connected them during the most dangerous portion of the exercise. Her movements were deliberate and controlled, testing each hand and foot placement before committing her full weight to the rope. Below them, other candidate pairs were attempting the same traverse with varying degrees of success. Sarah could hear shouted encouragements and technical advice being exchanged between teammates, but she maintained focus on her own crossing rather than being distracted by external activity. The traverse was completed successfully, but the descent proved even more challenging than the ascent. Tired muscles and raw hands made controlling their movement more difficult, while the psychological pressure of knowing they were close to completion created additional stress that threatened to cause mistakes. "Take your time," Chin advised during a particularly difficult section. "Better to be slow and safe than fast and falling." This philosophy had guided Sarah's approach throughout Hell Week. While some candidates had attempted to excel through dramatic displays of speed or strength, she had focused on consistent competence that accumulated into overall superior performance. The steel pier evolution reinforced this lesson, as several faster-moving pairs experienced problems that resulted in time penalties or elimination from the exercise. Their successful completion of steel pier earned praise from instructors and positioned them well for the afternoon's final challenges. But Sarah knew that the most difficult tests were still ahead. Friday afternoon would bring the culminating evolutions that had broken the spirits of countless candidates who had survived everything else Hell Week could throw at them. The afternoon began with around-the-world boat races, a variation of the familiar boat racing evolution that required crews to carry their boats over extended distances while navigating complex obstacle courses. The twist was that these races would continue for hours, testing endurance and teamwork when both were depleted to dangerous levels. Walsh's boat crew had evolved into a cohesive unit that functioned effectively despite the physical and mental exhaustion that affected every member. Sarah's navigation skills, Morrison's steady leadership, Chin's technical expertise, and Rodriguez's explosive knowledge had combined with Walsh's aggressive determination to create a team that could compete with any crew in the class. "This is our chance to finish strong," Walsh told them during the brief preparation period. "We've proven that we can work together when things get tough. Now let's show everyone what we're capable of when we put everything on the line." The boat races began at a punishing pace that immediately separated the stronger crews from those that were barely hanging on. Sarah's crew maintained their position near the front of the pack, their improved coordination and communication allowing them to conserve energy while maintaining competitive speed. But the real test came after the first hour, when accumulated fatigue began affecting everyone's performance and judgment. Several crews experienced coordination breakdowns that resulted in dropped boats, injuries, and elimination from the competition. The pressure to maintain pace while avoiding mistakes created exactly the kind of stress that SEAL operations would require. During the third hour, Sarah noticed that Rodriguez was beginning to show signs of serious exhaustion that went beyond normal fatigue. His movements were becoming unsteady, and his communication was less clear than usual. She realized that he might be experiencing the early stages of heat exhaustion, a dangerous condition that could quickly become life-threatening if not addressed. Rodriguez needs a break, she advised Walsh during one of their brief rest periods. He's showing signs of heat injury that could get worse quickly if we don't do something. Walsh studied Rodriguez's condition and agreed with Sarah's assessment. However, taking an extended break would likely eliminate them from contention in the boat races and could potentially result in additional punishment exercises for their crew. Can we rotate positions to give him some relief? Morrison suggested. Maybe put him in a middle position where he doesn't have to carry as much weight. This solution demonstrated the kind of teamwork adaptation that the instructors were evaluating throughout Hell Week. Rather than accepting that one member's limitations would doom the entire team, they found a way to redistribute responsibilities while maintaining overall performance. The position rotation was implemented successfully, with Rodriguez moving to a central position where he could continue contributing while receiving support from teammates who were in better condition. Their boat crew continued competing effectively while ensuring that all members remained safe and functional. This decision proved prescient when Rodriguez's condition stabilized rather than deteriorating further. By the end of the boat races, he had recovered sufficiently to resume his normal position and contribute fully to their crew's strong finish in the overall competition. As evening approached, the remaining candidates gathered for what everyone knew would be the final major evolution of Hell Week. The instructors had been deliberately vague about the specific requirements, building psychological pressure through uncertainty about what challenges remained. Senior Chief Rodriguez stepped before the assembled survivors, his expression serious but containing a hint of the satisfaction that came from watching candidates exceed their own expectations of what was possible. You have 6 hours remaining in Hell Week, he announced. 6 hours between you and an achievement that will define the rest of your military careers. The final evolution is designed to test everything you've learned about teamwork, problem-solving, and perseverance under extreme stress. The evolution was revealed to be a complex scenario that combined elements from every challenge they had faced during the week. Candidates would be required to navigate to multiple objectives using boats and, on foot, solve tactical problems while under time pressure, and demonstrate mastery of technical skills while exhausted and operating in darkness. Most significantly, the evolution would be conducted with minimal instructor supervision. Candidates would be largely responsible for their own safety and success, simulating the independence and self-reliance that would be required during actual SEAL operations. Sarah's crew received their mission briefing and began analyzing the requirements. The complexity was substantial, involving navigation across both water and land, coordination with other crews at specific checkpoints, and successful completion of individual skill assessments that would be graded for technical proficiency. This is everything we've trained for wrapped into one package, Walsh observed as they studied their assigned route. Navigation, teamwork, technical skills, and leadership all under extreme time pressure and physical exhaustion. Sarah began plotting their optimal route while other crew members organized equipment and reviewed the specific requirements for each checkpoint. Her analysis suggested several possible approaches, each with different risk-reward profiles that would affect their overall success. The direct route is fastest, but has the most technical challenges, she explained to her.